Yep.
Okay.
All right. If you give us a second, we're gonna bring the screen up and bring a table out for our wonderful panelists while I introduce them. So we have, of course, Dr. Vivek Palavali that we introduced earlier, who is a neurosurgeon, has been working in Michigan since 1995. And we have Dr. Rob Davidson, who is an emergency physician who splits his time to serve as the volunteer executive director of the Committee to Protect Medicare and Affordable Care. The committee is also one of our co-sponsors this evening. Rob was born and raised in Michigan, and he works helping to save thousands of lives every year here in Michigan, working as an emergency care physician. And he got his degree at Michigan State College in human medicine. And he has also done a lot of volunteer work, but I'll let them talk about that. And then, of course, we have Abdul El-Sayed.
Oh, is the screen coming down? Oh, okay.
You have to protect all the doctors' heads. It's kind of important. Of course, yes, so he is a physician, epidemiologist, and public health expert, as well as progressive activist and former gubernatorial candidate. And he is now the chair of Southpaw Michigan, who is working for a number of progressive causes, including universal health care. So we are going to keep this short. On the intro side of things, we're going to give each of these wonderful gentlemen a couple of minutes to introduce their particular positions on these current issues. And also, I did want to note that we did actually make a very concerted attempt to get some gender diversity. And it unfortunately didn't work, so I'm going to have to work, and Kathy's going to have to serve as your gender diversity for the evening. But we did try. I just wanted to put that out there. And we recognize that there are a number of very, very talented women who are experts in these fields. And they are definitely a part of this discussion, too. These are the guys that just happen to be available tonight. So we'll turn that over. Vivek, you're the man of the hour. I'll let you go first.
I believe in equal rights. And I watched the American soccer team win the World Cup. I was in California, but I got up early and watched the game. And I was so happy when they chanted equal pay. So I believe in that. First of all, thank you all for coming on a weekday evening. And again, one more round of applause for Jennifer and Kathy for making this happen. And Dr. Rob and Dr. Abdul, amazing people, very committed, compassionate. And I realized that during the screening, it looked like there were a lot of concerned Democrats, but let me take it back. A lot of compassionate American citizens, that's what I think. So this problem, as I mentioned during the introduction of the film, has been in the back of my mind since I started practicing here. The question is, a lot of people know it's very complex, but they don't know what the problem is. Since they don't know what the problem is, it's hard for them to get involved to see where they can contribute to the change. And that was the reason why I made this film, to make it as clear as possible about where the problem is. But nothing is gonna realize without the involvement of all of us as citizens. It's a catch-22 situation, you know. I talk to some other politicians, they say, well, we don't have enough votes for Medicare for all. Well, you don't have enough political votes because there are not enough people, because not enough citizens sent the right representatives to the Congress. And the question is, should it come top-down, or does it go grassroots up? I think we need both of them. Obama tried to do it top-down, but unfortunately was diluted. But we do have some leaders now who believe in the idea of healthcare for all, whether it's universal healthcare or single payer, even though I believe that single payer is simpler and better and it's the best. But I understand what the discussion in the country is. No matter what it is, unless we have leaders who believe in this and citizens who believe in bringing this, get educated, informed, organized, activated, and participate in the political process, it won't become a reality. And we want people like Dr. Rob and, of course, Abdul, who, as you know, ran a fantastic campaign, and everybody who wants to know about how healthcare is possible and can be cheaper, affordable, good quality, you got to go his website. He had all the details in there. So we're very happy to take questions and have all of us give their experience and their responses. Who's going next? Rob. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to go like 2 minutes because I want you guys to have a chance to ask questions, particularly of Dr. Palavali. I'm an emergency doctor. I've been doing that about 20 years and got me involved in a congressional campaign in a district to the west of here. Healthcare was a huge part of that campaign. I still see it. I had stories during the campaign. I still have stories. I had a patient who was suicidal, and he had to be placed in a hospital. This was just a couple of weeks ago. And by his family and by myself as a physician, we decided this person needed to be in a hospital to protect themselves from killing themselves. And we were told by the facility to which we're going to transfer him, we have to wait for prior authorization from his insurance company. I mean, this is just one of these basic things that you just take for granted. I tell stories all the time, and they just keep happening. And so it's why I ran. It's why I'm working with the Committee to Protect Medicare and Affordable Care. Really what we're trying to do is organize doctors across this country, particularly in the Midwest, to let people know a lot of what was described in the film after the passage of the ASA, what the Republicans were trying to do, what they tried to do in 2017 with the American Health Care Act, what Trump has continued to try to do in attacking healthcare in this country and potentially cutting funding to Medicare. It's our vision that we can use our doctors' voices as folks who see patients every day and try to advocate for the patients we treat and for the country as a whole. I am a member of PNHP. I am a strong advocate of Medicare for All. I have been so for many, many years and will continue to do so both on my own and within the work of the committee that I am now helping to direct. So I'll let Abdul talk for a bit, and then hopefully we can get some questions.
All right, good evening. I just want to, again, say a quick thank you to the organizers. Thank you so much for putting this on. Can we have another round of applause for a fantastic night, a fantastic film? There's very little that I can add to a panel like this. These two are folks who actually practice medicine, so there's that. But let me just say something. Oftentimes we get real confused when we talk in abstract about a lot of these big, complex, conceptual issues. And so sometimes I'm a pretty simple guy. I'm not that smart, and I like to think in metaphors. And so it's like somebody inherits a car, all right? And it's a car. It does mostly what it needs to do. And then you realize one day that while you're driving this new car that you inherited, that it has this error in its transmission, that when you hit a certain speed, it just starts to slow down and stop, right? And you ask, okay, so how do I fix this car? Like, what do I do with it? You've got one group of people who say, we're just going to tear your car down. And you're like, no, this is not what I want. I just don't want the car to slow down when I'm on the highway. So stop tearing it apart. And you've got some people who say, you know what? If it slows down every once in a while because there's an error with the transmission, you should just put a bigger engine in it so that you get to that speed faster and then inevitably you slow down. And so when we think about what we want to do with the car of healthcare, we have to appreciate the fact that we want it to go, we want it to do the thing we want it to do, which is to move at the speeds we want to get us from point A to point B. We don't want anybody tearing apart the car, right, because of this particular failure in the transmission. And we don't want to be solving the wrong problem, which is the engine. We want to fix the transmission. This is why I believe in single-payer healthcare, why I believe in Medicare for All. Because when people just say, well, look, we just need universal healthcare, what they're saying is, we're not going to actually solve the fatal flaws in the car. We're just going to give it a bigger engine so that maybe we can overpower the fatal flaws, when we all know full well that if there are fatal flaws in the car, building a bigger engine is not going to solve them. You got to fix the flaw, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't stop people from trying to tear apart our car, right? We can do both at the same time. And so we've got to remember that right now we've got a healthcare system that has a set of fatal flaws inside of it. And they're laid out really well in Dr. Palavali's film. And we can appreciate them by understanding what normal cars are supposed to do, like the British car or the Canadian car, right? Or the Ukrainian car or the Russian car or the Israeli car, or really most cars in high-income societies, right? When you get to a certain speed, they just keep going, yeah? Our car has a problem with it. So we've got to figure out how to identify and solve that problem. And that problem right now is that we have allowed a system of corporate for-profit insurance to hijack our car, our healthcare system, so that it does a couple of things wrong. A, it accelerates the cost of care for everybody. B, it creates consolidation in our healthcare system by creating this back and forth between insurers and hospital systems that tend to squeeze out both patients and providers. And C, it makes a few people a lot of money while keeping a lot of people from getting the health care that they need, right? So let's today talk a little bit about what we do to solve the problems at hand, right, while maintaining the system that we have, recognizing that the other parts of the car are okay. We've got great doctors in this country, right? But we've got to fix the fatal flaws that we have, the system of corporate healthcare that has hijacked our healthcare system through insurance and also through pharma, right, and also through a corporatized healthcare system. But that's what we got to fix, right?
Okay, couple quick ground rules. 1, your question must be a question. 2, keep it short. No multi-parts questions. Just ask one. If we have time, we'll come back to you. We'll get the other ones, and I'm sure the gentleman will be happy to talk to you more in depth afterwards. We do have to end at 9:30. One thing I wanted to quick say: Center for Inquiry is a nonprofit organization. We are completely nonpartisan, and these gentlemen are also nonpartisan as well. This is a nonpartisan issue, right? Health care affects all of us. Our health affects all of us. It has been made into a political issue, but unfortunately, it has been made into something that is dividing us rather than bringing us together, when, in fact, I believe that the vast majority of every person in this country would believe that we should all be able to get the health care that we need when we need it and not have to worry about bankrupting ourselves in the process. So, with that, Kathy and I are going to pass around these 2 microphones, and if you have a question for a specific person, please direct that question at that person by name, and just raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone around. We'll kind of split you down the middle, halfway this way and that way. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get you. We'll get you as much as we can. So go ahead.
So first off, thank you so much for the work that you've done on this. It's so compelling.
Thank you.
As I was watching this tonight, I saw a parallel between how I was moved when I watched An Inconvenient Truth, and that's climate change. And I was so moved when I saw that. But I didn't tear up when I saw it. I was a little scared. I teared up like 5 times tonight. And it's just as moving and just as powerful.
Yeah.
However, Al Gore produced that, and he has deep pockets. So he was able to take it to scale. What are the barriers, here's my question, what are the barriers that you face trying to take this message in this tremendous documentary to scale as something like Sundance Film Festival, or something that gets it beyond the Wealthy Street Theater, so that we're talking about it all over America in the flyover states, not just in East Grand Rapids, or this isn't East Grand Rapids, this is Thank you, Easttown. Yeah. That's my question.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you complimenting the film. Before I go further, I want to say I have not registered as any affiliation to the party. So I am nonpartisan. But what we're all trying to do is call a spade and bring truth to the power of the people. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do. And Abdul has done it. Dr. Rob is working on it, and he has been involved and created his committee. So that's what the whole point is. Now, your idea about how to take it, fortunately or unfortunately, I do have a daytime job, which is my neurosurgery, which allows me to do this on my own. And people ask me, how do you do this? I say, I don't play golf. That's how I do this, But the point is, that is the most important question that's in front of us right now, which is how to make as many eyes as possible to see this so that they know the truth. Now, there are many ways. One is, fortunately, there is social media, which hopefully we can get involved and spread the word. That's one way. We have people like Dr. Rob, who through his committee, who is trying to organize like-minded individuals who want to participate in making this happen. And then we have Abdul, who not only is like-minded, but he's also a political, I think, is a strong power in Michigan. So he could be, when he is, when I first met him, it was during Andover high school meeting. And when I listened to him debate, I realized he is the man that I'm going to vote for. And I did. And yeah. Because he believes in what the film is about and making this country provide fair, equitable, affordable health care. So when he is in a political circle, he can also influence by letting people know what's available. So there are many ways. As far as going into theaters and doing what An Inconvenient Truth did, the reason he was able to do it because he had Hollywood behind him, And Michael Moore is good. He is also a very concerned citizen. I like all his movies. But he had Weinstein behind him. So he had a big company behind him. But I'm going to try my best to see if people can help me get the word out, and people like Abdul and Rob also get the word out.
Wendell Potter has described what the problem is, that we have insurance companies and pharma that want money. They're going to be left over if we have Medicare for all. What's going to happen to them? There may not be an answer to this at this time, but if you have any comment, I'd like to hear it.
Well, I can answer that, but I want to let both of them answer, and then I can quickly answer that. Yeah.
I think the people making the vast millions, the lists of names you saw, the CEOs making tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't think anybody's going to cry a river for those people if they're out of a job. I think the individuals who are involved in the day-to-day of processing and paperwork, that work still has to be done. I know specifically in both Medicare for All bills, there are provisions for retraining. There's a soft landing period of X number of years. And again, I think when we looked at the film, so many different systems exist. I agree with Abdul that a Medicare for All type system is the most sensible of all the systems, but other systems can take us there and get us there in a soft landing and provide for those folks who work for those companies to have, to be a part of that new system of healthcare. As we expand and improve Medicare, we're bringing more people into that system, and inevitably you're going to need people with expertise to work there. But as far as the CEOs, the people making the dollars off the profits, the shareholders, I think those folks will all be okay.
Yeah, I think, so there are two bills, to be very specific. There are two bills that are being considered. There's the bill in the Senate that is sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders, and then there's the bill in the House that is sponsored by Representative Pramila Jayapal. And both of those bills talk about what would happen with the insurance industry. And I want to explain something. You all know what a monopoly is, right? In a monopoly, you are the only seller of a good. And if you're the only seller of the good, you can price the good however you want to price it, right? Because you're the only one who's selling. So if you want this good, you're going to buy from me, and you're going to buy at the price I tell you, right? There's the flip side of that, which is called a monopsony. And we don't talk that much about monopsonies, but monopsonies are the same thing, except for instead of being the only seller, you're the only buyer. Right now, if you think about a quote-unquote market for healthcare, which is a pretty bad analogy because healthcare doesn't really work like a normal market. In a normal quote-unquote market, you're not the buyer. You know who the buyer is? Health insurance companies. They buy on your behalf. You just pay them something so they buy for you. And when you have many of them, right, there's a lot of weird things that can start to happen about how they try and compete with each other by leveraging the health insurers that they're charging, right? But if you add Medicare for all, you have one buyer. That's why it's called single payer. A payer is a buyer, right? Single payer means you have one buyer. That means that Medicare becomes a monopsony. And that's really good because then they're just dictating the price, which means they can bring the price way down. That's good for all of us. The reason health insurance wants to stay in the game is because it's a system made entirely on charging you for healthcare that you won't use. That's how they make money, right? Charging you for healthcare that you won't use. And it doesn't really work very well for all the rest of us, except for, well, the CEO of Blue Cross made $23 million last year, up from 19 the year before, up from 17 the year before that. The CMS administrator who oversees Medicare makes something like $200,000. Like, I'm okay with that, right? It's a hard job. 23 million, 200,000, we're talking about many orders of magnitude difference. And there's a reason why Medicare has a 3% overhead and corporate health insurance has a 15% overhead. Those people who exist in the system right now, right, they're going to have jobs in the other system because we still have to provide health care, but they're not going to be as redundant. And here's the other side of it. Right now, you have this army in any given health institution of billers. They're literally people who exist to figure out how to bill different kinds of health insurance. And right now, 10% of this population in the country doesn't have access to regular health care. I would trade any day in the healthcare system an army of billers for an army of doctors and nurses and medical staff who are actually taking care of people. And that's what we'll be doing.
So, since Abdul gave a car analogy, I have to make a quick car analogy too. Imagine you have a car that got sick and you take it to a mechanic. The mechanic lifts the hood and says, yeah, I diagnosed the problem. I can fix it. It's going to cost, I can treat the car. It's going to cost you $100. And you're about ready to give the money. An insurance company calls and says, hey, hold on. Give me $200. You still take the car to the mechanic, get him look at it, diagnose, fix it. I'll give him $100. I'll keep the $100. How many of us will say yes to that? Zero. Why? Because insurance companies, private insurance companies are unnecessary middlemen. That's the problem. That's the first thing. You know? The second thing is, I just want to bring the Declaration of Independence for just a second, you know. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, of course, they were male chauvinistic pigs when they wrote it, so. All people are created equal and endowed by their creator certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, you know. It's the greatness of America is, in its declaration, it says all of us are equal. So why do we have so much difference in access and the ability to pay and the luxuries that come in with how much money you pay? So there's no reason for that. We got to have, as a patient, to me, it doesn't matter, is a VIP or not. I don't treat them like that. What is your problem and how can I fix it? So it's a philosophically equality issue in America. So for that reason, a company that treats everybody the same is what we should strive for and aspire for. And the last thing I want to say is, on an average, the OECD countries, you know, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development countries, $4,090 per person. And we spend $10,000. Now, if we can spend even a little bit more, we can still give fantastic care. But if you have insurance companies, that cost is going to go up because you have to pay for the administration and their profit. The second closest country that spends money close to what we pay is Switzerland, $8,000. And you know why it is? They have multiple insurance companies. That's the reason they pay that kind of money. Now, but if you want to have private insurance in this country, because there are two fundamental myths about Medicare for all. They say, well, you won't have choice, you can go to the doctors you want. Absolutely wrong. In fact, Abdul and I were talking about it the other day. It's the other way. You'll have more choice because if you have a non-PPO, non-master medical insurance, the insurance company will tell you where you can go, where you can't go. But if you have Medicare for all, you go to any doctor that is qualified to treat you and you're comfortable with. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you eliminate the unnecessary middleman, the overall cost of per capita expense will come down, which means there'll be more money in the pockets of American citizens. That's another thing people unfortunately don't recognize, that elimination of this middleman is going to bring the cost down. But if you decide to have what we call as a single-payer system, which philosophically treats everybody the same, versus what's called a two-tier system, where the essential basic benefits are all the same for everybody, but if you want posh hospital, or if you want something different, you want what they think is state-of-the-art, you pay more, and that's what some of the other countries do. But no matter what it is, there must be government oversight to prevent, if you allow private companies to exist, that you don't allow them to have unreasonable profits by gouging the enrollees.
To the doctors on the panel, among your medical colleagues who still are not convinced about the necessity of single-payer health care, what specific reasons do they give?
You take it out.
You know, I'm part of a private emergency physician group, about 150 doctors in West Michigan, covering 15 some odd hospitals. And what I will say is, the hopefulness in me is that I see the younger people coming up, others who are older, and I'm older within our group, almost 50. But some of the younger people coming up in their 30s or so are much more open to the idea of single payer, whatever you want to call it, Medicare for all, single payer health care. Now, it would be nice to couple that with not having crushing student loan debt that they come out with, and that would make it a lot more palatable for some. You know, I have to be honest, for the vast majority, when I would talk to doctors who I wanted to get to contribute to my campaign over the last couple of years, a lot of the discussion was, well, how much, I'm going to lose money. The AMA recently had somewhat of a historic vote. They had nearly 50% of their advisory board, I believe it was in Chicago, going back about a month, come out and say that they were not opposed to universal health care. They didn't say they were in support of it, and they certainly didn't support Medicare for all, but boy, for the first time, almost half of them weren't opposed to it. But AMA in general, as a kind of a quasi-union for physicians, they're worried about protecting the bottom line for doctors, and they're worried about that. The Republicans have fed into this, and I know this is nonpartisan, but again, we have to call it how it is. And the memes out there, and I heard them on my campaign, where Medicare for all equals Medicare for none. Or if we have Medicare reimbursement, doctors can't stay afloat, hospitals will close. So Dr. Palavali and I were just talking about it. And if you're in a population like he serves or like I serve, where 30% have Medicaid, which is significantly lower than Medicare reimbursement, if we got reimbursed at Medicare rates on all those patients and on the 10-15% who have no insurance, that isn't a boon, but boy, I tell you, that sure gets us up close to where we need to be. And if we all had practices that then had health care that was less expensive for us to cover our employees and our families, these are the arguments that I try to use. Again, we have to be able to talk to people and explain to them the reality, get the information out, not just to patients, but to doctors. I think that's why the work that our committee's doing, organizing doctors so we can talk to our fellow citizens, but also talk to each other and just say, listen, this system can actually maybe not be a boon for us, but can allow us to practice medicine the way we've always wanted to practice medicine, not worrying about money on behalf of our patients. But to make a short answer long, money is the single biggest reason people say, and quote unquote government control. I would argue that the CEO of health insurance control is much more prohibitive to me than any government entity has ever been. But that's where they're coming from.
So I'll just say I am a doctor, I just don't practice. I'm like a useless doctor. So my wife and I, my wife is a psychiatrist. She's a very useful doctor. But we always joke that if we were ever on an airplane together and someone got sick, between the two of us, we'd probably be the least helpful couple there is. I'm an epidemiologist, so I'd say, look, if there are 100 of you, we could do a great study and figure out what caused this. And she just keep asking how it makes them feel. For the first time in American history, the majority of doctors no longer work for physician-owned practices. The AMA organized in a time when every doctor was their own businessman, right? And I say man on purpose because there weren't female doctors at that point. And maybe if there were, it'd be a very different model. So you got this moment where every doctor is their own business person, and they think of themselves as running a small business. I'll tell you, doctors are some of the most arrogant people you'll find. And the idea that any doctor would be a line worker, to most of them, is anathema. But the fact of the matter is, today, that's exactly what doctors are operating as. There's this thing called an RVU. Next time you talk to a doctor, ask them what their RVU requirement is, right? It's a revenue value unit. It's literally the sprocket that doctors make on their line. And they all have to make a certain RVU. But here's the interesting thing. When you talk to doctors in my generation, right, the ones who are just getting out of residency, just got out, most of them are going to large hospital chains because smaller practices can't really survive anymore. Why? Because the insurers and the hospital systems can collude to change the prices so that if you're a small practice, you basically just get colluded out, right? And then those big hospital chains buy your practice or buy your hospital. Have you noticed how the number of different hospitals around has shrunk, right? They're all like, you name the corporation east or west or north or south or central, right? And that's because of this consolidation. So what's happened is that doctors who perceive themselves as being these business people are really no longer operating in that situation. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of younger doctors, because they can't find practices to be a part of where they actually own part of the practices. And let's be clear, like a doctor's practice is a co-op, right? It's the workers own the business. And together, a lot of those practices will buy real estate, make investments, and then not only are they making the money off of their doctoring, they're making money off the business. That doesn't happen anymore. So a lot of the folks coming out in my generation get these fat contracts early, but there's no upside, right? They're not owning a business. They're not working up to partnership. And so they're starting to realize that actually the reason I can no longer own my own business is because I have been colluded out because of this system. That's why. And so when you talk to doctors now and you tell them, hey, listen, you could be your own business owner again under Medicare for All because no longer are you going to be colluded out by the big system who's using the insurance companies against you. There's one insurance. And if you're a great doctor, you get to build a great practice. It doesn't matter how big you are anymore, right? That's the argument that's really started to work in my generation. And I'm looking forward to the day, actually, when somebody organizes doctors in a union. I think that'd be awesome.
Just want to make a couple of quick points. They kind of alluded to a couple of what I was going to say, but 1930s, when Roosevelt wanted Social Security, he also realized elders need health care. So he wanted to give health care. You know who opposed that? AMA. AMA said, no, we don't want government to tell us. We don't want government in our lives. So they mandated $25 for every doctor for a political action committee and told Roosevelt, if you don't stop health care, we're going to make sure Social Security won't become a reality either. So the reason doctors, well, let me go back. The group of doctors as a group, have different interests and personalities. He said, arrogant, egotistical, true. Economic, true. Thirdly, in fact, I have one of my closest friends who is a board member of AME. I just had a discussion with him 2 weeks ago. They still have this idea that Medicare for all is going to be a government takeover. And he says, yes, we want universal health care, but we don't want Medicare for all. We want multi-payer universal health care. So that's what they said. But let me say this. Doctors used to have power. They don't have power. They think they have power. They don't. You know who has power? Pharma, insurance company, hospital associations, device manufacturing associations. They have the power. And that's why no doctors could speak and have either public option or the idea of single payer during the previous Obamacare creation. So these special interests are so powerful, doctors cannot. I mean, we can give a lot of money, but one CEO can give more than they all doctors combined for a political action committee. So who has power? All of us as citizens. We have to get involved politically. The doctors have a fantastic role, which is they lost the control. So when they said, I don't want government in my life, it might have been a short-sighted benefit, but in the long term, they lost the control and they gave the reins to all the entrepreneurs. So right now, they can still lead the healthcare delivery because 80% of every patient seen, every diagnostic order, every diagnosis made, and every procedure done is done by the doctors and the nurses. And patients still trust their doctors. In the middle of the night, on a snowy day, when there is a gunshot wound, they don't call the CEO to come and fix it. They call, us. Yeah. Well, maybe me and Dr. Rob. But, so they still trust the doctor. So they have the ability to direct the healthcare, but they have to, as a group, come together, understand the value of a universal healthcare. Now, PNHP, which is the Physicians for National Health Program, I go to their meetings. I got to tell you, the primary care doctors happen to be outnumbering the specialists. In fact, there's only one neurosurgeon. When I get up and say I'm a neurosurgeon, they say, what the hell are you doing here, Because surgeons get paid more, so they don't want to lose the system. So the compassionate doctors who realize that there is a duty for their patients to have decent health care need to show the leadership, but it's the citizens that have to make it happen with the right kind of politicians making the laws.
And I mean, I'm sitting here and having a revelation next to these two gentlemen. And what Abdul was saying originally, that's why I called both of you and asked you to be a part of this committee. It's because of smart people coming up with ideas you really hadn't thought of before. And I will say, I mean, all the doctor bashing, I'm a physician, I love what I do, and I love my patients, and my best moments are in the room with my patient at the moment of care. And my worst moments are when they tell me I couldn't get my inhaler, or I can't afford that prescription, give me a different one. My wife's a physician. She's orders of magnitude more compassionate than I ever have been. Most doctors are, I really believe that. Most people who take care of patients, and primary care doctors are probably more so, and my wife's a family doctor. Emergency physicians are about 50-50 on the political divide. And as you get up the income scale, you get more into income decisions rather than compassion and healthcare decisions, perhaps. But there are doctors who are concerned about the care of their patients, the majority. And I think, as Abdul pointed out, I'm going to make it part of my mission to try to convince a lot of my partners and then others as we expand that they don't have the control they thought they had or they think they have. The good old days of doctors owning their own practice and getting to make their own decisions. Are you okay? Oh, no, you're okay. I thought that was something buzzing. I want to make sure you're okay. Okay. Thank you for being here, Hedda. Yeah. But the good old days of doctors being in control of everything and being in control of their own practice are pretty much gone. And so if we can just put that out there and get that out into the light so physicians understand that and they can just go back to advocating on behalf of what they love to do and the patients they want to take care of, I think that's really powerful. I hadn't thought of that argument before. I think it's really important. I think more people need to say it. So thanks.
My question kind of segued out of what you kind of were going into trust. I think a big issue, especially when you looked at the movie, you know, I don't want government care, blah, 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 but don't touch my Medicare. You know, the ignorance, the level of ignorance, we've become shockingly aware of the level of ignorance and the distrust in America today. So it's not just information, it's also trust. And what you're talking about, there's different, the only time I'm aware of this ever really coming to the front is when we're talking about abortion care. And they're saying this should be a decision between my health care provider and me, and not the insurance companies. And that's what has to be the message for all of our health care. But I only hear it in that aspect of health care. How do you build the trust to get people to learn, to go to a site, to look at Abdul's site? How do you build that trust to get the people to come to the trough?
I think you do this, you know, you have screenings, you do it in other cities and other states, you do it all over the place. I think you get, I think physicians, I think patients as either physicians advocating for their patients, patients advocating for them, for themselves and for others, to disseminate that information. You know, it becomes, I mean, it's tough to break through a news cycle, I'll tell you. Right now, we all know that. I mean, a couple of tweets, and that's 4 days of news coverage, and it doesn't matter what people care about healthcare. But I think it's just to be constant, be persistent, keep doing what Dr. Palavali is doing and putting out these films, and what Abdul is doing and organizing politically, and what we're trying to do as well.
Yes, yeah. That's what I was going to say. He spoke on behalf of doctors, but I wanted Abdul to give the final statement because he tried this. He mobilized unbelievable number of people with not the most rich resources available to him. So that's what he does. So I'm going to have him finish this up.
I have to say, you know, both Kathy and Rob ran fantastic campaigns on their own right, and thank you for bringing the issues, and thank you for organizing the way that you guys did. Look, there's something about our moment where folks are starting to wake up to realize the things that they've been thinking all along, but nobody's really voiced. And part of the goal of political leadership in a democratic society, and media leadership, and professional leadership, is to be able to voice those things for people. Because sometimes the words aren't there to say what you're feeling. And our job is to constantly be grasping for those words and to put them out in the ether so that people can grab them and say, that is what I was feeling all along. And what's fascinating to me is that when I have this conversation about Medicare for All with folks in places of power, they say, we've tried that already, it's not going to work. Don't you know, don't you know? And the point that I always push back with is to say, in those times, we didn't have enough words, and we didn't have enough people who had those words. And what's changed this time is not that the CEOs of insurance companies are going to be any less greedy than they used to be. They have more power than they've ever had. It's not that the hospital CEOs don't want to continue to make a lot of money. It's not that pharma is going to figure out how not to price its drug way beyond the attainment of anybody else. The difference is that people are talking, and they're using their words, and they're leveraging their words together to create movements. And that's what the value of this is. That's what the value of your being here tonight is. That's what the value of all of this means. It's that we have enough people saying the words in unison that, in fact, we are willing to push forward and create the change that we want. A lot of folks point to leadership. I actually don't think it's that. I think, if anything, leaders just kind of try and take all that and push it in one direction. But it's in people talking to their friends and family, right? Every one of you has a circle of influence that you can engage with. Every time you have this conversation about our health system, about why it's too expensive to afford insurance, about telling your story about how you had to fight just to get the care that you already paid for, about why you couldn't see the specialist that you were supposed to see, about why your grandmother can't afford her insulin and so has to ration it out. Every time you share those stories, all you're doing is giving people the words to say together.